If you all would, just go ahead and grab your seats. We're on a very tight schedule today. Got to stick to the agenda. I wanted to take care of a few internal things here before we go to the live streaming. Email them to you, answers to you later, or cover them in a response to comments document. Good morning and welcome to the West Virginia DEP Division of Air Quality rollout presentation of our new natural gas industry permit G80-A. Today is a live streaming broadcast. In a moment, I'll introduce our director, Fred Durham, to have some opening remarks. Again, we're live streaming today's meeting, and the complete meeting will be available on YouTube in the next few days. For those watching online, when you return from lunch, or when we return from lunch, be sure to refresh your browser for the afternoon session. Questions during today's meeting may be emailed to DEP G80-A at wv.gov. Email questions will be answered as time allows. If we do not read and respond to your question live today, we will either get back to you via email or in the official response to comments document. And now I'm going to introduce our director, Fred Durham. Fred.
Good morning. As Jay said, my name is Fred Durham. I'm the director for the Division of Air Quality. And I'd like to also welcome you to our G80 rollout meeting. And I'd also like to welcome the folks that may be watching this via live streaming. We really appreciate your interest, and we're going to try to make sure that your time is well spent here in listening to us. You know, 5 years ago, the division processed 27 well-related or gas-related permitting actions. Last year, in 2014, we processed 247 permitting actions. 247. That's nearly a tenfold increase from 2009. We're talking about new construction or modification of well pads, gas dehydration facilities, gas processing units, and gas compressor stations. Our permitting section has about 4 full-time professional people that are devoted to doing permits for the gas extraction or gas transmission, gas processing industry. And we have about 3 full-time equivalents in our compliance and enforcement section that are also doing the same. But that's really just a fraction of the folks that we've got devoted to this industry. Really, everyone in those 2 sections, in one way or another, has something to do with getting permits processed and reviewed for natural gas. Currently, we've got 3 general permits that cover most of the activities in the industry. We've got the G30, the G35, and the G70. The problem is, over time, federal regulations have evolved, and so many of those general permits no longer have kept up with the federal requirements. And so, and there's also, we have occasions where there's practices that the industry is using that weren't foreseen at the time that the permits were developed and issued. Now, the facilities that already have these general permits will be able to continue to operate under those permits, but we will not be issuing any future permits under the G30, 35, or G70. It's our intent, once the G80 is complete, is that's going to be the vehicle for doing general permits for the gas industry. Even our G70, which is the most recent permitting that we issued, it was issued in October 2013, it's already out of date with the federal counterpart new source performance standard that we lovingly refer to as Quad O. That's OOOO. And so we need to update that kind of thing and to keep up with future updates. And so G80 will incorporate by reference the federal counterpart or the federal relevant regulations, so we won't have to come back and revisit this year after year after year. We think G80 is going to be beneficial for both industry, our agency, and for the citizens at large. It should be something that's going to be easier to follow in terms of the registration forms that we've created for you to fill out when you register under it. We think it'll be easier and more logical for folks that want to review those registration applications. We think it's going to be easier for our engineers to go through those applications and make sure that the appropriate federal and state regulations are being applied to all of the activities that are taking place at these types of facilities. Now, the G80 registration itself, that is what you actually apply for to get registration under the general permit, is going to list all of the emission units, all of the air pollution control devices, and all of the emission reduction techniques and operating practices that have to be used at that facility. And it's going to specify which specific sections of the permit that are applicable to the units that you have at that facility. The registration also will include the registration limits, or the emission limits, and the throughputs, the limits on the throughputs for those facilities. There's going to be, in our draft, you'll see that there's going to be flexible permitting options that aren't currently allowed under our existing general permits. And by having those options of flexibility, we think that's going to allow for actually installation of better air pollution control devices as conditions at the well site might change. We'll take just a couple of minutes. I think most of you already have a copy of the agenda, and maybe hopefully those of you that are live streaming have also seen a copy of the agenda, but just kind of roll through this right quickly, and then I'll turn it over to our first speaker. First, we'll be going with Robert Keatley. He'll be discussing an effort that we've been putting quite a bit of time into to map the locations, the geographic locations of facilities that have air permits throughout the state. And that effort really was sparked by the expansion of the natural gas facilities and our effort to understand where they were being located and how they interacted with one another. Followed by Rob, we're going to have Bev McEwen. She'll be discussing new source review permitting. She'll explain a little bit about the difference between a conventional permit and a general permit such as G80. And next on the agenda is going to be Jerry Williams, and that's probably the main reason you're here and the main reason you're watching the live stream. He'll be getting into an overview of the draft G80 itself, explaining what the G80 is going to be picking up and what can or cannot be done to register under the G80. In between those two things, we'll have a break, and as Jay alluded to, I really would ask that you be really conscious of your time during the breaks. Let's try to stay on schedule. Same thing with lunch. After Jerry gets through, we'll have from 12 noon to 1 o'clock for lunch. So I really ask you to try to stay on time and get back from lunch. If you happen to need to step out and take a call, or if you need to go to the restrooms, or if you need to, or you can't get back from lunch on time, we will have this up on YouTube. So you can go back and review something that you heard that you weren't really sure about, or something that you may have missed during the session. In the afternoon, we're going to be more focused on the actual registration forms themselves. So some of you folks may not really care to stick around for the afternoon session, and that's fine. You can stay as long as you want, pick up as much as you want, or if you want to leave after lunch, that's fine too. It's really going to be geared toward the folks that actually have to fill out the registration forms, or the people that have to review those forms. There'll be a mid-afternoon break somewhere around 2:15 to 2:30. Then Jerry will wrap it up, and we'll shoot for an adjournment at 4 p.m. So that's the day that we've planned for you. I'm really excited personally. I think this is a really good product that we're putting out there for you. And we'll be looking tomorrow. We'll be accepting comments. We'll start the comment period. If you've got formal comments in writing that you want to send to the agency, we'll start accepting those tomorrow. Today's dialogue is, if you have questions, we'll answer them, but they're not going to be on the formal record in terms of a response to comments. So I just want to make that clear. So with that having been said, I'd like to turn it over to Rob Keatley, and he's going to discuss the DAQ mapping project, and he'll be talking about the changes to the federal Quad O. Rob?
Thanks.
Pardon me.
Running out of space up here. Okay, the first presentation is going to be on the new mapping project that the DAQ partnered with our GIS people. It was based off, if you guys are familiar with the oil and gas GIS system for mapping. It's a pretty good system. It's a work in progress, so if we don't have your facilities, or if you don't have a facility where you think it should be, we're still fixing sources and still getting all the kinks worked out, but I think we have a pretty good progress on it. I did print out the presentation. It's a little hard to see up here on the screen. The presentation is on our website, and the web link, or the website to the new mapping program, is up and running on our DAQ website as well. So you guys can start taking a look at the new mapping project whenever you want. Basically, this is where, if you click the website that you start out, we have done some maps per request, a couple different counties. They were snapshots in time. This particular mapping program will be updated on a regular basis and will be sorted by different classifications. But this is where you will start out at if you do click the website link. We have a legend. The legend is on the left-hand side. You just have to click on the word legend. It describes what each of the different colored symbols are representing. It helps you out and guides you through the different descriptors for the site. Like I said, the colored symbols represent a different industry type and facility location. Because you have to zoom in pretty close, the little round symbols or triangles, depending on, and other shapes, you have to be very, very precise with your mouse to get the facility information to pop up when you click on it. We have different base maps. These are located in a drop down in the top right hand corner. The base maps, you can just change between whatever imagery you would like to see. We have set up the default as the light gray canvas, just because it's easier to see the facility colored symbols. Like I said, it will start out with the light gray, or you can choose what you prefer. Basically, we've been playing with it. When you zoom down to an image, when you find a facility or you search an address or a coordinate, normally best to keep it on the light gray and then convert the base map over to an imagery type system. I'm going to show you some examples of those here later on, but these are all preferences. You can pick and choose. There's several different base maps. This is, and I want to give you a disclaimer, we didn't pick on any industry or any company. These were just picked out of the air just to show you examples of how the mapping system works. Pick John Amos just because it shows up on the map really well. This is the light gray canvas. The little tiny dot, if you guys have your handouts, is where the facility is located. When you change the base map to the imagery, then you actually get to see the up-to-date site location a little bit better, and all the different streams and topographical images. When you click the symbol, I've shown you the pop-up box that comes up. When you double-click, when you click the symbol, basic information on the facility pops up. We're driven by facility ID, so the facility ID pops up top, the company name, company address, the NAICS codes, which I'll go into later on, and the lat and longitude information. This is something we may expand on later on, But for right now, just to get it off and running, this is the basic information we're pulling out of our databases to put on to the mapping program. This DuPont Washington Works, one of our bigger chemical companies, used just a topographical base map instead of the light gray, just to show you the contrast between the two different types of base maps. Switching over to the imagery, you can see it's a fairly large chemical facility up in Wood County. I'm going to talk a little bit about the drop downs for the layers. We tried to come up with some layers that we thought there was most interest in. As you can tell at the top, the first layer is fossil fuel power plants, and then we go into different industry codes for the oil and gas industry as well. By clicking on and off those layers, you can search for just the industry classification code that you're looking for. The next codes stand for the North American Industrial Classification System. It's a way to describe and different industries. It's a national standard. It kind of replaced the old Standard Industrial Classification, or SIC code. We are now required by EPA to use the NAICS codes for our uploads to their database. So that's where the descriptors come from, are the NAICS codes, and that's what we based the sorting and the layers on. The next layers, you can clear all the layers and just choose the layer that you want. You can choose just power plants, or you can choose just a different type of oil and gas industry. We'll probably expand this down the road depending on interest, but right now this is the 6 or 7 layers that we have. When you pop open one of the layers, we have partnered up with our oil and gas office, OOG, and when you click on the oil and gas layer, it pops up their mapping information, and I've described the legend over on the left. When you click their base map, or their layer map, you get some of the different images of where their well pads are. They have a separate mapping program which you can search and do multiple things if you really just want to look at oil and gas well sites. Like I described, layer for the fossil fuel or power plants. We have another way to filter. We can filter by company name. You just type in company name and hit filter. You do have to hit the filter button, not just enter, and it will pull up based on the name, and as long as we have it spelled right in the database, it should pull it up. But that's another way to just search for different company names. On top of the layers, and these are identical, the NAICS codes are the industrial classifications like we described, but you can type in the NAICS code that you want to search for, and it will just pull up for that industry code all the sources that we have listed. One of the things that we search by the most internally is by the facility ID. All of your site locations have a facility ID that we upload to EPA. The facility ID is a 3-digit county code, and then just a sequential number, a 5-digit number after that. To search by address, I just plugged in the building that we're in today. This is where it took us. That search bar is in the top right. It is with the facility ID search bar. You just have to pick one or the other. Also went ahead and plugged in the coordinates to that same search bar to search for this building. And a little bit different, you put in the longitude first and the latitude second. So you put in the -80 number and then the 39 number second. One of the last features of the mapping program is different sources. So you zoom in to where you want to look at, you click the measure bar up in the middle of the search bar function, and then you come over here and get your ruler. You left click on the source you want to, and then you drag it down to the other location that you want to measure the distance for. Then the number will appear right up here to give you some distances between different sources on the mapping program. We are going to upgrade that and have 300-foot buffer zone that pops up that corresponds to the general permit requirements. There's the web link for the site. It is up and running. If you have any questions, you can email myself or give me a call. We're gonna kind of be tweaking this. We've been working on it for several months. I wanted to make sure that our GIS guys were given a lot of credit because they did a lot of the work. One of the guys is here. So it's been a pretty good project, and I think it's turned out pretty well. But if you have any questions about this, I can help you out. Okay. The next presentation I have is about Quad-O. Quad-O is the federal rule that came out for a variety of different oil and gas operations. It targeted initially well pads as a new industry, and then incorporated gas processing plants and some other conditions when they came out with it initially. Came out in 2012, and it was amended 2013, and the new amendment to the rule was published and is effective December 31st of last year. One of the big compliance dates that just got triggered was the green completions for the well pads, which was the first of the year, 2015. This is just a description of one of the questions we've gotten on a repeated basis is the well completions only apply to natural gas wells principally drilled for it. We requested guidance from EPA Region 3 on this, and they came back with the text, and I won't read the whole text, but describing what their interpretation of Quad-O was, and that interpretation was in conjunction with multiple different regional offices. Basically, if you drill into Marcellus, you are defined as a gas well. So you would fall under the well completion requirements of Quad-O if you drill into a shale gas or Marcellus. And as the well completions apply to hydraulically fractured, refractured wells that commenced after August 23rd, 2011. That's the big trigger date in the rule. One note was they clarified that it doesn't apply just to wells fractured with water. It does encompass nitrogen fracked wells, and I don't know if we have any, but carbon dioxide fractured wells as well. Just a picture of a completion combustion device. Some of the trigger dates for well completions or green completions. Wells drilled on or after 1/1/2015 have to comply with the green completions. One of the big updates to the 2014 update to Quad-O was giving a better definition of how you handle those green completions. You're supposed to, as soon as practicable, sellable gas go into the flow line, gathering line, and there is still a general duty clause to minimize the releases to the atmosphere. But if you cannot direct the gas to the flow line, then there's a requirement to use a completion combustion device. They came up with a new definition, initial flowback stage. Basically, the initial flowback stage is the stage where you're flowing back the well before the separator can be used to separate the gas and the liquids. They call this stage, which they did respond to comments, the initial Quad-O. So as long as you can separate the gas, you wouldn't be in this stage. But if you can't, then in this stage, there are no control requirements, completion combustion device or other, under the new definition. The second new definition was separation flowback stage. This stage is where you can separate the gas with your separator. It's technically feasible. When it can be separated with the separator, it needs to go to the flow line after the first of this year, and there is the exemption if you, for some reason, can't get it to the flow line. But like I said before, the definition as soon as practicable, and we would have to take a look at that for the saleable gas. One of the other changes was that DAQ had already interpreted the rule to allow you to limit your PTE with control devices or emission reduction devices to get you below the 6 ton per year VOC trigger for storage tanks. That was clarified a little bit in the new rule that came out. One of the other big changes that we noticed was if you do remove an affected storage tank from service, it needs to be completely emptied and degassed. And there's a descriptor of how that needs to be done and what classifies as being emptied. We've had a little bit of trouble with the new above ground storage tank rule, where people have been removing tanks from service and scrapping them and catching themselves on fire. But, just a picture of some of the tank farm. Basically, that's kind of some of the updates for the Quad-O that just came out a little over a month ago. If you have any questions about that, I can answer those now.
So you're saying on initial flowback, before it's technically possible to separate the gas is just vented, or combusted?
Yes, it can be. During the initial flowback, he asked if the gas could be just vented during the initial flowback definition that they just published. Yes, it was conceived in the old rule that if a completion combustion device could not be utilized, that if there's too much water or other materials in there to effectively burn it, that they could just vent the gas. That was in the previous rule and was clarified in response to comments. They just went through and defined it in this rule. So it doesn't require a control device, so they can vent it. They do have to maintain a log of what they vent, what they flare or use a completion combustion device for, and that log has to be maintained as a record for us to review.
Robert, I wonder if you could touch a little bit on the storage vessel definition changes to now include or how to handle parallel storage vessels.
Okay, the question was about parallel storage vessels. They clarify a little bit better the way we had already interpreted parallel storage vessels. Most of the modeling programs that are used to calculate the 6 tons per year VOC trigger assume that you're going to run it from the separator, heat treater, or whatever you're using, low pressure tower, to the tanks in a parallel series, so that all the flash gas emissions don't come from one tank. If the tanks are in parallel and you need to take one out of service, you need to follow the requirements. Sorry about that. You need to follow the requirements of degassing and emptying the tank. But if you then need to put a tank back into service in parallel, you basically treat it like the affected tank that was removed. It clarifies that it would fall under the same Quad-O requirements as the tank you removed, and it just clarifies removing and putting tanks into service and out of service. Does that kind of get you where you need to go, Jesse?
I was specifically thinking about more along the lines of the new language that was added to say that if you have parallel tanks, you should look at the throughput of all of those tanks for determining applicability with the 6 tons per year. So it, in effect, brings all of your throughput as if it was going through one tank or one bin. I believe is one way that seems to indicate that in the new language, which
Well,
I think is a big change.
yeah, I'd have to take, okay. The question was whether or not, when you do the calculation method, whether or not you'd have to run the simulation model based on all the throughput going through one tank. That was not our interpretation. I'd have to take a better look at the exact language. I have it here, I can talk to you here later on. But that doesn't make sense in the fact that they only are requiring the PTE per each tank. So for you to do the potential to emit calculation based on throughput going through all one tank, that doesn't kind of jive with the way that the rule is written. But we can take a better look at that and see where we're at with that. But some of that is addressed in Jerry's presentation about parallel tanks and so forth, and how the calculations are come up with.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, the next presenter is Bev Kuhn. She is a senior engineer and the head of our new source review permitting section.
I think I need to clarify something right out of the bat. I am not short. Rob Keeley is just very, very tall. So I hope you all can see me. I'm not trying to hide. Morning. I am Bev McEwen. I'm the New Source Review Program Manager, which basically means that all pre-construction permitting is my program. Today I'm going to speak to you about the NSR permitting program and how to find information on sources, permit applications, and permits specifically. I've divided the presentation into basically 5 different areas. It doesn't flow very well, so please bear with me, but I'm trying to hit the questions that I commonly get and the information that I really want to get out in terms of changes we've been making in the program. Under the topic of public information, I'm going to hopefully dazzle you with a few little fancy graphs, lots of color, talking about the number of permitting actions we've done in the last few years, emissions by county, and I'm going to talk about how to find and get information from DEP and DAQ. I'm going to talk about DAQ's plans for electronic permitting, also commonly referred to as e-permitting. I'm going to try to answer the most common question I receive, which is, how can I get my permit faster? I'm going to discuss aggregation. I'm going to talk about what the term means for permitting, what it doesn't mean, and how West Virginia determines aggregation. And then I'm going to answer, I hope, the second most common question I get, which is, well, what can I do before I get my permit? And I think we're running a little bit ahead of time, so hopefully if I do this right, there'll be plenty of time for me to take questions. Okay. As I've said, I've basically got 3 graphs I'm going to toss up here. I've gathered together information on the numbers and types of permits we've issued under the NSR program, and that'll be the, obviously, NSR completed actions by type graph. We've gone through and determined the number of permits issued to the natural gas industry versus all other industry since 2009. Fred Durham kind of referred to that and gave you some numbers earlier this morning. I'm going to get a little bit more specific on that. And I have gone to the 2011 emissions inventory and graphed up the total emissions by some select counties in West Virginia. And then, going to really get into NSR permits and where we have them on our webpage. A big part of permitting is public comment and providing access to the public documents such as permit applications, the draft permits and our fact sheets that are out for public comment, and the final permits. I will be discussing where to find these documents, and then also how to ask for maybe other information from DAQ through a FOIA request. Many of you here in person today know that you don't have any papers in front of you on this presentation. I promise this presentation will be on our webpage. There's not a whole lot on these PowerPoint slides and I want you to kind of listen to me, hear what I have to say, other than these graphs. And again, these will be on our webpage, and you can go back and look at them. When you put these through a copier, it doesn't really come out very pretty like it does in person with all the pretty colors. This graph shows the number of permitting actions issued by type of action from 2009 through 2014. Now, under new source review, and more specifically, this is Rule 13, we issue many different types of permitting actions. Okay, all but 2 of them are shown on this graph. I did not include relocations and temporary permits, basically because we get 1, 2, maybe 3 of those a year, and that would just be a really small little sliver bar on the graph and wouldn't necessarily really show you anything. I also didn't put in here withdrawal applications. That happens from time to time. Somebody chooses not to pursue an action. Sometimes somebody has to withdraw because they're going to make changes and they're going to resubmit later. So those actions aren't reflected in here. So with that said, I'm going to give you some numbers, so please don't try to check me and add up the numbers you see on this graph and say, she's not doing her math right. How can she be an engineer? Like, I know that. It's okay. I promise. When you look at this graph, it shows the increase in the number of types of permitting actions since 2009. Basically, this is the direct result of the natural gas industry production of the Marcellus Formation. Now, in 2009, NSR permitting issued 309 total permitting actions. We issued 337 total actions in 2010, 386 in 2011, 482 in 2012, 621 in 2013, and 737 in 2014. So our workload more than doubled since 2009. And yes, I'm sure some of you are sitting out there going like, but wasn't there a great recession in 2008? Maybe that had an effect on your numbers. It's like, yes. Okay. It's only fair to point out that 2009 had the fewest issued permitting actions in the last 15 years. Okay. A normal average yearly number of permitting actions, when I went back and looked through the last 15 years, is about 400 plus or minus. More likely a little plus, closer to like 410. Okay. This graph shows the number of permits issued to the natural gas industry versus the number of permits issued to all other industries since 2009. Okay. The increase of the green numbers reflects basically, I think, overall economic recovery in West Virginia from the Great Recession on. I'm not an economist. I'm not trying to play one here for this presentation, but it's very clear that if business is willing to spend money and expand their process, that is reflected in the number of permitting actions we receive. Now, the increase in the number of natural gas industry sources, and I think I've messed up my colors, didn't I? No, natural gas is blue, so I want to make sure. But so the increase in the natural gas industry sources in getting permits is more directly attributable to the production of the Marcellus Formation. I'd further note that the issuance of the G80 general permit for natural gas production sources in late October of 2013 has directly led to 139 sources seeking general permit registration under the G70 in 2014 alone, basically the year that we've had that permit out there. Now, the other 100 or more sources under the natural gas industry were for compressor stations, extraction plants, fractionation plants, and all other sources that maybe were not eligible for the G70 general permit, but are truly in the natural gas industry. Whenever I talk to members of the public, I am often asked about the total emissions in a county. I said, what is the increase in emissions from these sources that we've been seeing? Why don't we aggregate all of these sources? Now, aggregation is actually a specific term with a specific definition, and I'm going to talk about that later. But what I can provide is information from the 2011 emissions inventory. I've chosen 6 counties. 3 of these counties, Doddridge, Harrison, Wetzel County, are obviously the ones that have seen the most increase in sources that are directly attributable to the natural gas industry. I've put in Kanawha County. Honestly, this has not seen too much natural gas permitting, but it's the county I live in. It's the county I'm standing here speaking to you from. So it does give a reference point there. I've added in Wood County. Wood County is possibly the future home of a cracker. We have a cracker plant application in-house right now that we are reviewing that will be located in Wood County. And Greenbrier County, I think, is a good sort of neutral county, so to speak, to put out there and show. It hasn't had a lot of natural gas industry boom out there. It's not known for having huge populations. It's not known for having large industries, but there it is, and you can see how it situates among the other counties. This is the most recent inventory, 2011. We do emissions inventories every 3 years, and that means that, yes, 2014 emissions inventory will be coming, but basically that's going to take some time. This is not something that just West Virginia does. This is every state in the nation collects their inventories every 3 years. EPA also gathers information, and then it's all put into, then they send us back information so we can do our state inventories and put it all together, which basically means if you're looking for the 2014 emissions inventory numbers, it's probably going to be about 2016 before you see it. The emissions inventory divides sources into categories such as on-road vehicles, off-road vehicles, point sources, which are defined as major sources of 100 tons per year of a pollutant, area sources, which are those minor sources permitted under the new source review permitting program, and biogenic sources. Biogenic sources are basically natural sources such as trees and agriculture. And yes, trees emit volatile organic compounds. Of the almost 16,000 tons of VOCs for Greenbrier County, almost 14,000 tons come from biogenic sources. I'd also like to point a little bit to Kanawha County. Of the more than 54,000 tons of carbon monoxide, CO, for Kanawha County, almost 35,000 tons is from on-road and off-road vehicles, so traffic. Okay, so I've put together some pretty graphs, and that's all nice, Bev, but why don't you give us some real information? So let's talk about permits and permit applications. We have made big changes to our new source review permits for review webpage. Many of you know that our NSR permits for review webpage is the place where DAQ posts all of our draft permits and our fact sheets for permit applications that we have out to public notice. Now, in the past, we've had very limited server space, and we couldn't provide more than basically a year's worth of things out to notice, and then we had to start over again every year. We just didn't have the space. More recently, DEP has invested in newer, larger servers, and this is basically as a first stage to major upgrades to all of our permitting databases and our filing systems, et cetera. But what this means for me and for you is that I now have the space to put a lot of stuff on the webpage. That means that we are now going to place all permit applications we receive, all of our draft permits and our fact sheets, and our final permits on our webpage, and we're going to leave them there. We've already, if you looked at that webpage, you go to it, you'll see that we've already rearranged it. We basically arranged it by county, so you're not searching through things. You can go to, if you're interested in a certain county, what applications are pending. It is there by county, alphabetically by county. And within that county, we've listed all applications alphabetically by the name of the source. All permit applications received since January 1st, 2015, so we're basically just a month into it, will be or have been scanned and placed as a PDF document on this webpage. All final actions will be placed on this webpage. Now, I do want to note that if we have a draft permit that we've gone to public notice on, we will replace that with the final action, whether that be a final permit or a denial. And yes, sometimes denials do happen. For those who are out there thinking that never happens, yes, we do deny permits. Just to be clear, we simply don't have the people power to make this retroactive. So any issued permits or permit applications received before January 1st, 2015 will not be there. However, there is a bright spot out there. DAQ is in the very early process of converting all of our paper files into electronic ones. And eventually, it's going to be a long process, but eventually those electronic files will be available to the public and you'll be able to find pre-2015 permit applications and permits. Now, I've talked about this webpage and I've named it the New Source Review Permits for Review webpage. That's the actual webpage address. It's pretty horrible, I know. It's not nice and simple like google.com, I'm sorry. But if you want to go directly to the webpage, you don't want to type it in, you're afraid you're going to get all the little capitals and the lowercase letters mixed up, you can always go to DEP's main webpage, and on the left-hand side, click on Division of Air Quality homepage, and then again on the left-hand side, click on NSR Permits for Review. It's right there, it comes up. It's a very long page, again, because we're putting a lot of stuff there, and you can scroll down through and find all the information. Confidential business information will not be placed on the webpage, not in any form, okay? And just to be clear, types and amounts of pollutants cannot be held confidential. That is public information and that will be there as part of the application. As a little side note, as we've been putting these on the web page, we have found very frequently when a source submits their permit application to us, they pay their application fees by check, and they'll make a copy of that check and put it in all 3 of the paper copies of the application. Please don't do this. We don't need copies of the check. You know, I see the check so I can make sure the amount is correct, but then it goes to our accountants. They deposit it into all the proper accounts. I don't handle the money beyond that. I don't need to know what your check looks like or your router numbers, et cetera, and certainly that's not a matter for the public. There are, just give us the one check, the real check, that's all we need in the application. Believe me, if there's no money there, we'll let you know that you need to pay some fees. Also, want to remind people that you can pay by credit card. A lot of times in this business industry, within business, we run across more and more that the person who's sending in the application is not the person who has the ability to sign those checks. They got to go somewhere else, often out of state. So you can pay your permit applications fees by credit card. All you need to do is say somewhere in the cover letter or the application that's what you want to do, and our accountants will contact you with the proper amount and collect the proper information from you. And I think one of the biggest things that's going to help that my people, I know when I put this out there for my engineers, they're very happy about this, but I think industry is going to be very happy with this as well, is you no longer need to submit 3 hard copies of your applications. All we need is one hard copy with that original signature and 2 CDs. Okay. We prefer the permit application to be in a PDF file all together, not separate attachments, please. We can arrange it, but it takes a little bit more time. And back to trying to put these applications on the web page, if it's one file, it's much easier to load up than trying to put it all together, make one file to load it to the web page. You know, if outside of natural gas industry, we deal with a lot of different sources. You know, if your CD or your application is going to contain a lot of spreadsheets that have embedded emission calculations, you know, that's great, but we do need at least one PDF file in that CD that has all those printed out, because that is public information. We're not going to be trying to figure out if it's an Excel spreadsheet or your whatever program you might be using to print that off to find that for the public. The public should be able to have access to that, so please make it one file. You're still welcome to submit the extensive spreadsheets on the CDs for that engineer to review, but again, we need to have a PDF file that includes everything. You know, now that I've tooted my own horn, so to speak, about all the wonderful changes that we've done to our webpage, about making permit applications easier to find and permits available, I do want to discuss FOIAs a little bit, or the Freedom of Information Act. In West Virginia, all pending permit applications and draft documents are available for public review. No FOIA is required to do that, but if you want a permit issued in 1997, or you want copies of all inspection memos for a particular source, or a listing of all sources issued a G70 general permit registration, you have to file a FOIA. You can file a FOIA by email address at depfoia@wv.gov, or you can send it in writing to the mailing address I've placed on the slide here. Any FOIA request obviously needs to be as specific as possible. When you send in a FOIA request, you really have to say, do I want an air permit? Do I want a water permit? Do I want all permits for this company, which all across DEP? So that when those FOIA requests come in, you know, the people in the Public Information Office know who to send it to in order to make sure that you get the information you're requesting. And I want to clear up a common misconception about FOIAs. I have often heard people say they won't file a FOIA because they have to pay for it. Okay. Most FOIA requests can be answered quickly and for free. If you want a copy of a particular permit for a source, you give us an email address, we can send that permit to you in an email. It's free, not a problem. If you want several different permits, again, odds are pretty good we can send it to you in an email pretty easily. It's free. However, if you want a listing of all natural gas sources issued permits since 2005 by county with the facility ID numbers, permit numbers, dates of issuance, permitted emissions for each pollutant, and copies of those permits, well, yeah, we're going to charge you. This is not information we readily have available. It's going to take many hours to gather this together, and we have to charge for the time. Quite frankly, I've seen a few FOIA requests come in that I kind of wonder if somebody's not trying to get a master's or a PhD for the information they're requesting. It's major research. And while I'm all for public information and trying to give answers to people about what we do and how we operate, we're not magic. We don't have these perfectly wonderful databases that everything's in where we can just do these, put in a couple search terms and come out with the information people are searching for. So with that, the best advice I can give you is ask. We will provide you with an estimate of how long it will take us to gather the information and an estimate of the cost. And this is before we gather the information. If you don't like the estimate, you can always say no. But please, don't just think, hey, they're going to charge me for it, so I'm not going to ask. They really don't want me to have this information. We want to provide you information. And if it's in our power to do so, we will. Now that DAQ has overhauled our new source review permits for review webpage, information on pending permit applications, at least from DAQ, I think is going to be much easier to find. However, DEP actually has a very nice webpage called DEP Public Notice. It lists all the public notices published by all the different agencies under DEP. If you open one of these notices, it will contain the information you need in order to figure out who you need to contact, maybe a permit writer, maybe an agency, in order to get more information on that public notice. Now, for example, all DAQ public notices listed on the DEP Public Notice webpage are copies of the public notices that DAQ actually publishes in the newspaper. And at the bottom of those public notices is the DEP web address for the new source review permits for review webpage. Now, the DEP Public Notice webpage can be checked at any time by members of the public. You don't have to sign in, you don't have to join, but you can sign in, you can join, and they will send you copies of all public notices that either all across the state or for one or more counties, for what you're interested in. And much like our webpage, I've provided the specific web address, and again, I know they're horrible. I'm sorry. I have no control over that. But if you go to the DEP main web page, you just scroll down a little bit, and you're going to find a column that says, "How do I?" ? Okay, under that column, there's a link that is "Find a Public Notice." You click on that, it takes you right to the DEP Public Notice webpage. Another comment I get pretty often is, how do I contact you? It says, I can't find any email or phone numbers for any of the people in your office. Well, on our webpage, there is a complete listing of all DAQ personnel by their work unit. It can be found by going to the main DEP webpage, again, to the Division of Air Quality Home. Then there's General Information link. You click that, and then there's a link for office location and contact information, and a listing of DAQ employees by work unit. You click on that, it comes up with a complete listing. It has every DEP employee, every DAQ employee's phone number with their extension and their email address. It actually has their work schedules as well, but I think some of those aren't quite up to date. But it does give you an idea if maybe you've called and they're not answering and it's Friday, maybe they don't work on Fridays. I'll further point out that DAQ's permitting webpage at the very bottom is a listing by name of every member of the permitting section. If you click on any name, it will automatically come up as an email addressed to them. All you got to do is fill in the email for whatever information or question you want to ask them. Sometimes, again, back to, well, who do I call? So-and-so is doing this. There's smoke everywhere. I want to lodge a complaint. Well, this is the phone number and email address for DAQ to submit a complaint. I want to do a little side note. Wanda Spradling is a very, very nice lady. She is there to answer your questions, to try to help you out, so please be polite. I know it's very frustrating when you want to lodge a complaint. We've all been there, whether we're trying to cancel our Comcast service or whether we've got a problem with our internet. We've all been through that. You're already frustrated before you even dial the phone. But we are here to help, I promise. And Wanda will gladly take your information and respond to you. Some things I want to point out about complaints is that you can make them anonymously. You don't have to give any name, number, contact information. You can just report an issue you have a problem with. But if you do that, we can't get back to you. We can't let you know what we found out from our investigation. If you give us a name, an email address, a phone number, we can contact you and let you know what we found out. And DAQ does keep people's information who lodge complaints confidential. Now, the little caveat to that is that if somebody takes us to court and a judge orders us to reveal it, we will. But otherwise, if you lodge a complaint, your name, your phone number, your email address is confidential and is not released to anybody. There's also an emergency line. If you call this number, they will most likely answer with emergency spill line, but they take all emergencies. It's actually Homeland Security. And you can call this number 24 hours a day. The caveat here is it really should be an emergency. And if you're not sure if it's an emergency, it probably isn't. The benefit to it is that if it is an emergency, they have all the numbers. They know who's on call for what, and they will take your call, and they will make sure they contact the appropriate agency, whether it's DEP, whoever it might be, because it might not just be DEP, and get the ball rolling on that. So again, the emergency number is for all of DEP, but the complaints information is only for Division of Air Quality. I don't really have many details on e-permitting. We've been talking about this probably for 10 years. If you've been coming to any training courses or hearing us talk about permitting, the basic concept of electronic permitting is that sources can file their applications electronically. The general idea is that this speeds up the permit application review process for one reason, because the application isn't even accepted by the agency if it doesn't contain all the necessary information for an application review to start. And the most common real-world example that I can think of for filing e-permitting is like using the TurboTax program to file your federal income tax. You fill it out all online. It goes through and asks you the right questions, and then it submits it electronically for you. The important points I want to mention today is that DEP already has several agencies using e-permitting, and they want all of DEP agencies to use it where possible. For DAQ, we believe that this new G80 general permit, with its newly designed application forms, is the place to start. It will be the first permit application that will be available via e-permitting, but that's not going to be anytime soon. Okay? Obviously, we're here today to roll out this general permit. We're going to go through our public notice period. We're going to receive comments. We're going to make any appropriate changes. And then, assuming that the G80 general permit is issued, that's an assumption, we're not saying for sure, we will then begin the work of making it available for e-permitting. So at the earliest, we're talking end of 2015. It's the intent of DAQ to make all of our existing general permits available via e-permitting, but this is a long process. We want to revise many of our existing general permit application forms to formats similar to those that we've developed for the G80, and we'll be going over those this afternoon, and then convert them to an e-permitting format as well. Again, this is a long process, a long time down the road, where we have to clamor for attention and fight for the right to get our work in there among all the other DEP agencies. So, yeah, again, at the earliest, this is going to be 2016. More likely, it might be 2-3 years down the road. But at this time, we have no plans to make our construction or modification permit applications available via e-permitting. Very often these are, even though they're considered minor sources, very complex, a lot of information goes into them, and it's not quite as simple as TurboTax makes it seem in terms of writing an e-permit for construction modification applications. What can I do to get my permit faster? I once attended an air quality conference put on by the state of Ohio. The person speaking on permitting started his speech by telling a little anecdote about how when he first started in permitting for the state of Ohio almost 20 years ago, the very first phone call he took was someone asking them, "Where's my permit?" He said that that day, before he came to give his speech at the conference, he made the mistake of answering his phone, and it was someone asking him, "Where's my permit?" And he was pretty sure that the very last call he was ever going to take before retirement or death took him was going to be someone calling to ask him, "Where's my permit?" Now here I am, it's 15 years later, and I'm standing in front of a slide talking to you with the title, "What can I do to get my permit faster?" So I've hit it, but pretty much the question is, where's my permit? Well, there is no miracle answer. There's no magic form that's going to move you to the top of the list that's going to win you the permitting lottery. Okay? There are no shortcuts. Right now, sitting on their desks, every member of the New Source Review permitting group has at least 11 applications right now. With the new G80, and especially the changes to the application forms, the DAQ has looked hard at our application review process and the information we need to determine if a source will meet the rules and regulations and therefore should be granted a permit. In the near future, we're going to do the same for all of our general permits. We've made access to permit applications and final permits much easier. We believe we are doing what we can on our side to make the process as efficient as possible, but industry needs to do the same. We need complete applications. I can't stress that enough. You need to file those applications as soon as you can. I have taken calls from people who have read our rule and think it's 45 days to get their permit. And they call me on the 45th day after they have submitted it and ask me, where's their permit? And I have to explain to them that, go through, find out what their source is, where their application is in the process, determine whether their application has even been complete or not. You need to use the DAQ forms. In the past, we've been a little lenient, especially with spreadsheets and tables and such, where people develop their own processes as they're gathering their information to submit in their permit applications. Starting with the G80, we're going to require you to use our forms and only our forms. We've developed these forms to get the information we need to do your review. If we have to search for that information, that takes time, and that adds to, over the long run, adds days and weeks to processing permit applications. Don't leave blanks. I saw a permit application last week where in the application form we ask you yes or no. Somebody wrote in N/A. I didn't know if that wasn't available or they didn't think it was applicable. And if they didn't think it's applicable, then write no. But the point is, they're kind of making it up as you go along, and then that leads to a question the engineer has to stop and ask you to clarify. Don't leave things out. One of the issues we've had with our existing G30 and 35 general permits that we are correcting by incorporating it now into the G80 is there's no truck unloading and loading in those applications. It would take a while as we're reviewing applications, but we've had many people submit those applications and not include any information on truck loading or unloading, even though their process flow diagrams clearly show it's there. And when asked, they would say, well, it wasn't in your general permit, so we didn't think you needed that information. The better question is, if it's not there, maybe it's not covered by that general permit, so maybe you're not eligible for that general permit. And we've had several sources lose a good deal of time having to withdraw those applications and resubmit either under the G70 if they were lucky or the construction modification program. And above all, please respond to questions. We get a lot of calls from people who submit we've asked them for information, they submit it, and the day after they submit, or even the day that they submit it, that we receive it, they call and say, okay, so where's my permit? You got the information, right? But it might have taken 2-3 weeks before we got that information from them, where that application sat there. Okay. Because of the extremely heavy workload, I've advised all my permit engineers not to answer the phone. Now, don't panic. I don't mean never. I encourage them to set aside some part of their day, whether it's the morning, the afternoon, whether it's right after lunch, where they respond to their emails, they listen to their voicemails, and do those responses, those calls, and get back to people. Okay. It simply slows down the review process to be constantly interrupted by the ringing phone or the pinging of the emails. And with that said, it's important if you call, please leave a message. If you want to be informed of progress on a permit application, such as a complete or an incomplete letter, then make sure your name's on the contact information in the permit application itself or in the cover letter. We will be glad to copy you on all that information so you will have an idea of where your application is in the review process. Every permit application is reviewed by me upon receipt. The permitting secretary logs the application in and sends an email to the responsible official and to any contact listed in the application or in a cover letter if there is one. We'll let you know that the DEQ has received the application. We tell you the permit number we've assigned it, the facility ID number. We tell you the actual name of the permit writer it has been assigned to and how to reach them in terms of a phone number and usually an email address as well. It also lists any obvious deficiencies in the application. And soon after that, then as I've talked about, the application will be posted on our webpage. So you'll know, you can always check there to see, hey, did they get that? Now, if you don't receive this email and you can't find your application on our webpage within a reasonable amount of time after you've mailed it in, especially if you've overnighted it, then we don't have your application. It doesn't happen very often, but it can. All you gotta do, call me in that case. I'll look it up, double check, make sure we haven't received it. It may actually mean that we've sent your application back. And yes, that does happen. People don't like to hear it, but at least 4 or 5 times a year, I get an application that hasn't been signed. And often they're very great applications. They're very nice. Everything looks good there. But if it's not signed, we don't accept it. We're sending it back to you. Now, once we received an application, the permit writer has 30 days to determine if your application is complete or incomplete. And they'll mail a letter to you letting you know what the status is. If you don't receive that letter within, let's say, 40 days of you thinking that we've received it, then email or call your permit writer and leave a message if you call. They will get back to you. But if they haven't, okay, I'm promising, but if they haven't contacted you within a reasonable time, and just to be clear, that's not 2 hours. That's not, I've been calling all day and they aren't answering their phone. But if they haven't gotten back with you within a reasonable amount of time, then call or email me. I will look into it. It's very important that you know what you are permitting. You can't fill out a few basic forms, leaving specifics like the make and model of an engine, or the number of line heaters, or how many produced water tanks you're going to have. This will stop your application review until you submit the required information and the engineer can get back to your application. Once the permit writer starts your review, the fewer questions they need to ask, then the more likely that review will continue uninterrupted, and the result will be a final action, usually a permit issued. If they have to stop and wait, we're not only waiting on you to respond, but you have to remember the engineer has other work to do. And they've got to fit it back in once that information they've requested comes in, got to fit you back into the queue, so to speak. PTE calculations. I get a lot of questions on this. We permit a source for its maximum capacity. Under state and federal rules, you have to meet those, but we don't arbitrarily limit you. We automatically start out with, well, what's the capacity the source can operate at? That's the information that you need to be providing as the applicant. Now, all West Virginia permit writers have engineering degrees. They've all been with the DAQ permitting section for at least 7 years. All have worked in private sector for at least a little bit before taking a job with the DEP. Most are registered professional engineers. So please don't try to flub your numbers or back calculate from 99 tons to avoid Title V. We're going to notice, we're going to ask questions, and it's going to delay your application. Promised I was going to talk about aggregation, so here we are. Aggregation is a topic that's been around for the 20-plus years that I've been doing permitting. I'm sure many of the applicability determinations of EPA, I'm sure from those determinations, that it's been around since basically the first permits were issued under the Clean Air Act. Aggregation is known as the three-pronged test. A source must meet all three conditions to be aggregated. Those conditions are common ownership and control, the same first 2 digits of the SIC code, and contiguous or adjacent properties. The purpose of the three-pronged test is to define the source. This is the first basic step in any permit application review. For the vast majority of sources, this takes a couple of moments. It's pretty clear what the source is, and there's no questions. We do that in a moments of seconds. You know, it's just very fast. But for a few, that's not so simple. And the permit writer will review the proposed source under the three-pronged test. And when we do this, we put it in our engineering evaluations so that you know that's happened. If you're a member of the public or if you're a member of industry, it will be in our engineering evaluations. If the source or sources, because it might mean that we're looking at another nearby source, meets all 3 parts of the test, they are aggregated. If they don't, they are not aggregated. In 2014, out of 737 permitting actions, the DAQ made the determination to aggregate 6 times. And honestly, the only reason I know that is because we actually got a FOIA request asking for that information, so we had to do the research. It's not something we really keep track of. Again, this is just a basic part of the application review in terms of defining the source. What aggregation is not? Aggregation is not the total emissions from one company in a county or state. Aggregation is not total emissions from an industry in a county or state. And aggregation does not automatically require additional emissions controls. But what does it mean if a source is aggregated? It means we give the source or sources one facility ID. It could mean that they have more than one permit. They might have R13 2432 and R13 3211. They might have more than, we have many sources out there. The major chemical manufacturing sources, the DuPonts, the Dows of this world, they have many different permits from us, but they are one source in terms of how we review them. Again, this does not mean that there are new or additional controls that are required if your source is aggregated. But it could mean that your source is not eligible for the general permit. If the aggregation puts you over 100 tons for, say, carbon monoxide emissions, you are now a Title V major source. You will have to get a Title V permit, and you are not going to be eligible for our G80 or any other general permit that you might be trying to apply for. Now, does West Virginia have a policy on aggregation? The short answer is no. We do not have an official policy on aggregation. We follow the guidance provided by US EPA and its many applicability determinations. We also follow current court decisions on aggregation. Summit decision is most recent ones we're very familiar with. So we don't have anything in writing. We're often asked, well, do you have a distance for the contiguous and adjacent? No. A source might be a mile apart, but we aggregate it. A source might be right next door within a quarter of a mile, but we don't aggregate it. We look at the three-prong test and all the determinations under that when making our decision. Now, EPA claims they're working on a rule. Well, they've done it a couple times. They've issued some memoranda. The next administration comes in, they've withdrawn those memoranda. Basically, all I can say on that note is that if they issue a rule, we will review it, and if it's promulgated, we will make any and all changes as necessary to comply with the rule. And I promise I'm wrapping it up. I know you're all sitting there going like, oh, I hope we have that break soon. I'm really ready. Okay, so my final topic is, well, what can I do before I get my permit? Under Rule 13, Sections 5.1 through 5.3 spell out exactly what you are allowed to do before your permit is issued. Some of the obvious ones, you can clear land, you can grub stumps and roots, any natural impediments. You can excavate, grade, you can dig and construct foundations. You can demolish existing structures. I have put asbestos in the slide in red just as a caveat that just like any other demolition out there, many older buildings contain asbestos. So you have to make sure that any asbestos is properly remediated before the demolition. And you have to make sure you meet those rules and regulations. Yes, air quality has an asbestos section. You can always contact them. You can upgrade the utility support facilities with the caveat that if that directly leads to an emissions increase, you can't do that. An example that we ran across many years ago, many people in West Virginia are familiar with the Century Aluminum site. They used electric arc furnaces to make aluminum, which basically means they took power from the grid to make aluminum. If they ever had to get a new transformer, upgrade their utility support facilities, that would directly lead to them being able to produce more and have more emissions. So they would not be allowed to do that. But the vast majority of sources, West Virginia being in the terrain it is and being very rural, it might mean that you have to contact the power company because they need to run a few power poles, a 1.5 miles up the hill so that they can bring power to your facility. That's appropriate, that's okay. You can construct and modify structures which are strictly office buildings, warehouses, anything that could be used for a non-industrial purpose. A common question I get is, well, we're going to have a bathhouse. Can we go ahead and put that in? It's going to have a hot water heater. That's fine. If we deny your permit, somebody else might come along and buy that property and be, hey, great, bathhouse is here. This is wonderful. But it doesn't directly go to your facility and your permit. You can order equipment. You can bring in your supplies. You can take possession on site, as we say, receive or store on site, any and all equipment. Okay? If it comes on a pallet wrapped in shrink wrap, leave it that way. However it's delivered to your site, the best advice I can give is leave it in that manner that you receive it. Please don't pipe it in. Please don't set it in place and try to claim that, oh, hey, there's 6 inches of pipe that we haven't hooked up, so it's not constructed yet. I can't speak for enforcement, but I think they're going to look at you a little sideways and ask a few questions, and it might not go well for you. The key thing you need to remember is that prior to obtaining your permit, you cannot erect or install the source. You cannot build your source. Okay, that's the whole purpose of a pre-construction permit, is you get the permit before you construct, let alone operate. And just to be clear, section 5.3 in the rule states it even more bluntly, that if you do, and if you do any of these activities that we said is okay, that you build your bathhouse, or you upgrade for utilities to come in, or you build some buildings, you spend some nice amount of money on some footers. That's all well and good, but that is at your own risk. You cannot claim that because you've invested this money, you have a right to a permit. It simply doesn't work that way. And with that, I will be glad to take any questions.
I have one question. On the Reg 13 permits for confidential business information, how are we supposed to submit that now that we're doing scan, copy, and
Yes. Yes. The question is, if you do have confidential business information and you submit it in your application, now that we're going to the one copy and we're going to put it online, how do you handle that if you have confidential business information? The sources that have CBI know that what they've done in the past is they would submit the 3 hard copies that were redacted, and then they would usually submit at least 1, if not 3 copies that included the confidential business information. That's no longer what we're requesting. Now we would like 1 hard copy that is redacted, 1 hard copy that contains the confidential business information. Now on the CD, we would ask for the same thing, that you give us a PDF file on a CD that is clearly marked permit application non-confidential or permit application redacted, and also one that says permit application CBI, or permit application includes confidential business information. Just however you want to specify so it's very clear. That way we have the copies. A big part of the CDs, as I often remind people why we always wanted the extra copies, is we do have regional offices. If you are seeking a permit for source in Morgantown, we are going to send copies of the applications and all of our files to our Fairmont regional office so the public can travel there to see files. Plus, obviously, those offices need to have copies of those files. Those offices should have copies of any confidential material so that they understand what's going on and have access to that information as well. So we're back to 1 hard copy redacted, 1 hard copy containing the confidential information, and then the same with the CDs. Just make sure it's very clearly marked. Any other questions? Okay, that's.
Thank you, Bev. We're going to take a 15-minute break. For those of you that are on site, out the rear door and the next door past it, there's vending machines. If you want to get something to drink or get a snack, that's out there. Then I think Jay indicated where the restrooms were, back up the hall this way. And I again ask you to be very conscious of the time. For the folks that are live streaming, we're going to take a 15-minute break and start back promptly at 10:45. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone back from the break. My name is Jerry Williams, and this morning I will be talking about the proposed general permit G80 that we talked about earlier today. I would like to welcome everyone for attending, especially in this bad weather. It was nice that everyone could make it here safely. I do have a lot of material to cover here this morning about the G80. I'm going to try to, for the most part, talk about it at a higher level and not get into a lot of the details of it, like at a lower level. I mean, we'll answer questions that we have at the end. The whole general permit G80 came about from, just over time evolution. I mean, we started out way back when with the G30. And for those that have been involved with permitting along the way know that in around 2008 that we developed or we modified the G30 in its present form and also added the G35 general permit. And at that time, natural gas industry isn't what it is today. So it's a completely different ball game. So the G30 and G35 is not a good fit for what we have currently. And then in 2013, it was a long process that the DEQ went through in issuing the G70. And Laura was the permit writer for that and was heavily involved in the development of that general permit. And that went for the natural gas well sites. So then we had, for compressor stations, a 30-35, and then for the well sites, the 70. But, in times past, a rule would be issued, and it would just be the rule, and changes wouldn't be made to it. So you could issue a permit and not worry about having to update it because the rule never changed. But that's not the case anymore, especially in the natural gas industry. So unless we feel like opening these permits up every year or every couple months, then we have a problem trying to keep up to date. So the way this all came about is like Bev and I started talking, and other people in the division started talking, and we decided that this is a good path to take the G80 and to absorb the 30, the 35, and the 70 into one general permit that could take care of all the issues. The first thing I want to do before we get into talking about the details of what the G80 will encompass is for those that may not be familiar with the permitting process, I want to just quickly touch on that before we get into the details. As far as our permitting authority for air is found under State Rule 45 CSR 13. That rule outlines the procedures for obtaining a permit, for making modifications, for making administrative updates. It also establishes a definition of a stationary source, which a stationary source is, if you're defining a stationary source, you have to obtain an air quality permit. And there are several different ways that you can meet the definition of a stationary source. That you're subject to a substantive requirement of an emission control rule. And for example, I'm just going to talk completely about the natural gas industry here. Like if you have testing requirements under NSPS like 4I or 4J, or you're subject to subpart quad O requirements there, or the NESHAPs like AA for D-high units, or 4Z for internal combustion engines. If you're subject to some standard requirements under any of those rules, regardless of what your emission rates are, you're required, or you're a stationary source, so you're required to obtain a permit. Another way would be that you exceed an emission threshold. Like for the regulated pollutants, it would be 6 pounds an hour and 10 tons per year. Or for a hazardous air pollutant, you're looking at 2 pounds an hour or 5 tons per year. There's also a list of toxic air pollutants in Rule 13 that if you exceed any of those values, you would need a permit. For example, there's a limit on formaldehyde. If you're more than 1,000 pounds per year of formaldehyde, then you're required to get a permit. There's other pollutants besides formaldehyde, but that was just an example. And then another way would be like if you don't meet those requirements, but you want a permit anyway, then you can voluntarily get a permit. So 45 CSR 13 outlines the procedures about the state issuing general permits. A general permit is going to be for a category sources for similar processes. Currently, we have general permits for coal processing, hot mix asphalt, natural gas, materials handling, concrete batch plants, and emergency generators. So you take a group of sources and you write a permit and try to encompass as many. We try to encompass as much as we can. You can't cover everybody; it's impossible. And some things we don't want to cover under a general permit. But we try to cover as much as we can under a general permit to make it worthwhile. So it's not like we don't issue a general permit where only 5 people are eligible for it and nobody ever registers under it. Well, that was a waste of our time to do something like that because it wasn't beneficial. So we try to make it beneficial for all parties. Another advantage of the general permit is that it promotes consistency. I mean, so Company A doesn't get this type of permit, and Company B gets something that doesn't look anything like it. We want to be consistent. We want the same requirements to go into all those permits. So, like I talked about in the intro, General Permit G80 was developed for production, which would take in the G70, compressor and dehydration, which is going to take in the 30 and 35. And as we get further along this presentation, I'll go through the various sections that are in that general permit so you can see the different types of equipment that the general permit will cover. These general permits are going to cover all state rules and regulations that may apply to these facilities so that it encompasses everything, and it'll be like a one-type permitting deal. As far as general permits G30, G35, and G70, to go into a little bit more detail than Fred did earlier, they will continue to exist. Their registrations will continue to exist in their current format, meaning that if right now you have a G30, G35, or G70, and you don't modify it, or you don't make an administrative update to it, you do nothing to it, you can continue to operate that registration under those general permits. But if you plan to make an administrative update or a modification to those general permits, then the new registration that will be issued to you under the G80. You don't have the option of applying for a registration under 30, 35. Once the G80 is issued, you will not have the option of applying for a registration under any of those permits. It will just be the G80, and that's it. So if you make no changes, if a facility makes no changes, this isn't going to affect them until they do make a change. And then once they make the change, then they will fall into the G80 realm. Okay, benefits of a general permit. There are benefits of having the general permit. Once again, it does provide consistent requirements for all facilities. That means that going into it, so what happens is a general permit's issued, and then companies will register under it. So the general public and the industry knows what those permitting requirements are. It's not like if you apply for a Rule 13 permit and then someone here writes a permit and then we get a notice with it, and at that point in time, you see what the requirements are. you know what the requirements are of this up front. So if you don't want to apply to register your facility under it, you don't have to. But everyone knows what those requirements are, whether it's, like I said, the general public or industry. In addition, this general permit, the way that it's written, it has language in it that facilities would reduce their emissions more than they would than what maybe a regulation would require. There are options in a general permit where you can take more of an emission reduction, so the emissions will actually be lower than what they would be had you just followed the regulations. So that's beneficial to everyone as well, because in addition to having an easier process for permitting, essentially, there's situations where the emissions would be lower than they would if they would just go through the Rule 13 process. The general permit, in the registration that would be issued to a company, it contains all the facility information. Basic information about the facility, the emission units that will be at the facility, throughput values at the facility, what rules apply, and emission limitations that would be applied to those particular emission units that are covered. There's also a general permit benefit of the notice period. With a Rule 13 construction or modification application, when a company applies for a permit, they have to place a legal ad notifying the public of their application. And it's a 30-day comment period. There's also the review period, by statute, 90 days. And as part of that 90 days, there's also a notice of intent issue that the DEP goes out with at the end of the process. With the general permit, next week will be when the legal notices are published in the newspapers. That will be the legal notice that we provide the public of the general permit, of the chance to comment on all these documents. Once the permit's issued and a company chooses to register under it, then they publish a newspaper ad notifying the public of their application. The time frame or statute for this is 45 days versus 90. And another benefit of the general permit is the application fee is $500 versus an application fee of $1,000. And that's the base application fee. NSPS fees and NESHAP fees still apply. As far as like the NESHAP fee, but we're not going to make a company pay the NSPS fee and a NESHAP. Like if you have an engine and it's subject to NSPS 4J, so you'd have to pay the NESHAP fee because that's $1,000. But you would also be subject to 4Z, and that's a NESHAP fee at $2,500. And the decision that the DEQ has made is if it's a new engine under 4Z, which says that you just have to meet the requirements of 4J, then you have to pay the 4J fee, which is $1,000 in addition to the $500. But if it's existing under 4Z, then you have to pay because it's different requirements than 4J, then you have to pay the NESHAP fee, which is $2,500 instead of the $500. But you could be a situation where you pay the NSPS and the NESHAP both. Like if you have a glycol dehydration unit, you'd pay the $500 application fee, and if it was a 4J engine, you'd pay $1,000. That'd be $1,500. And then if it was double H, it'd be NESHAP fee, it'd be $2,500. So it's possible that you could have a $4,000 application if all those things are true. Okay. Like I said, today is an informational meeting where we're rolling out the information on this, what this permit contains, and then this afternoon we're going to go over the forms and the registration. We're not taking public comments today. That will begin tomorrow. Next week, the ads will begin to publish in the newspapers. But the general permit is going to undergo public notice in newspapers throughout the state. And that's a list of the newspapers that we are publishing our ad in. beginning next week. It'll be the Charleston Gazette, the Dominion Post, Herald Dispatch, the Wheeling Intelligencer, Parkersburg News, the Clarksburg Exponent Telegram, the Martinsburg Journal, the Herald Record in Dodge County, the Wetzel Chronicle, the Moundsville Daily Echo, and the State Register. So tomorrow, unless there's a website issue, the draft general permit, our fact sheet is accompanying document of the draft general permit, the application forms, and the public notice will be placed on our DAQ website tomorrow. And they will be there throughout the public notice period. The public notices are set up to be published next week with the official public comment period ending on March 30th, 2015 at 5 p.m. So I'm sure we will have comments, and you need to make sure that we have your comments by that time. And the comments can be sent to us either mail, fax, or email. Please do not use my email address for these comments. Please send, if you are going to email your comments, please send them to DEP G80-A at wv.gov. There are several of us here that have access to that email account. I will be the person most likely responding to all those, but I don't want to have to like sift through my regular email on these and miss something. So if you want to make sure that your comment is seen, please send them to this particular email account that we set up. Because that we know that there is a great interest in this general permit, we have went ahead and decided that we are going to hold a public meeting about this general permit. And we are going to have it here in this room on March 16, 2015 from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And we will also have it set up where it will be broadcast live stream like we're doing right now. And the concept of that public meeting, for those who've been to other public meetings of ours, will be the same. We will provide information on the general permit, and then we will accept comments and questions and try to answer as many questions we have. If we can't answer the question on the spot, we will get back to you with those. If everything goes well and we issue this general permit, all the documents that you need as far as completing the application or accessing or wanting to see the general permit that was issued will be on our website. So now that I've got through all the intro stuff, now I'm going to get into talking about like the permit, which is I know why you guys showed up. So as I said before, we're encompassing general permits that we've already had. And so anybody familiar with our general permitting process knows that there are eligibility requirements. And so to start off with, right off, we said that, you know, these are the eligible NAICS or SIC codes that you have to be in order to be eligible for this general permit, which covers production side, compressor side, transmission, and, you know, support activities, distribution. We feel that it's encompassed anything that we've seen that would be eligible. So we really don't think we've missed anything here. If we have, like I said, please feel free to send comments to us during the comment period. Now I'm going to talk about what the general permit was designed to cover. Before I get into all this, I want everyone to be aware that there was involvement from a lot of people internally with this, permitting and enforcement. And because anytime you have a document, you can issue something and then like you think of ways, well, how can I make this better? What works better? You know, what do we need more information about? What do we ask for too much information for that we really don't use? And so like we went to co-workers in permitting, we went to inspectors and enforcement, you know, what they need to see on the registration that may make their job easier. And I do at this time want to, I mean, like I said, there were a lot of different people involved, but I do want to say there were several people that were very helpful in getting us to where we are today. And it was Bev McEwen and Robert Keeley and Laura Jennings. They helped out tremendously as far as getting to where we are. So it's not anyone should take credit. It's a group effort, but I just want to make sure that you guys know that there was a lot that went into this. We didn't do this blindly. I mean, we listened to what, we've had public meetings. We've listened to what citizens had to say. We've dealt with industry. We've dealt with consultants. We have heard things, how can we do this better? And we tried to bring all those things together in this document. So it is something that, we didn't operate blindly on this. As far as the types of equipment this will cover, it'll cover gas well effective facilities, storage vessels, gas production units, inline heaters, heater treaters and dehydration reboilers, pneumatic controllers, centrifugal compressors and reciprocating compressors, and then reciprocating internal combustion engines and generators, truck loading and glycol dehydration units, and then the associated control devices and emission reduction devices that go along with those. So, like I said, we did pick up things that didn't exist in some of the other general permits to make it where it was a more useful document. The control devices and emission reduction devices that are included in this general permit include completion combustion devices, enclosed combustion devices and flares, closed vent systems, carbon absorption, condensers and BTEX eliminators, vapor recovery units, and engine control devices such as non-selective catalytic reduction, selective catalytic reduction, and catalytic oxidation. So whenever you go to develop, whether it be a Rule 13 permit or general permit, you have to make a determination like what rules are going to apply to what I'm doing here. And so, you got to look at the federal rules, EPA rules that apply, and also any type of state rules that apply. The federal rules that we're looking at would be like the NESHAPs and the NSPSs. First thing I want to do is talk about the state rules that are covered under this general permit. 45 CSR 2 talks about the control of particulate matter from fuel burning units, and that's going to apply to the gas processing units like inline heaters, heater treaters, or reboilers. Rule 6 is control of particulate matter and smoke from flares. So you're looking at like the flares and the combustion devices are going to be subject to Rule 6. Rule 10 controls sulfur dioxide from fuel burning units. And once again, that's going to be your gas processing units, your heater treaters, inline heaters, dehy reboilers. Rule 13 is the mechanism for obtaining the permit. And then Rule 16 incorporates the new source performance standard requirements, and that's going to be 4I and 4J for the engines, and then 4O for all the things that are covered under 4O. And we also have Rule 22, which is a fee program, which outlines what fee the applicant or the registrant would have to pay on an annual basis. For the sources covered under this general permit, there are only two options. You're either going to be what's known as what we classify as an 8D source, which are compressors greater than 1,000 horsepower. If you have compression at your facility that's greater than 1,000 horsepower, you're required to pay an annual fee of $500. If you don't have compression more than 1,000 horsepower, then there's just a catch-all category. It's 9M, and the CTO fee for that is $200. And then Rule 34 incorporates the NESHAPs, and that's going to be your double H and 4Z. Now I want to talk about the federal regulations that are covered under this general permit. And first thing is 4O that Robert talked about earlier, or he talked about the changes to it earlier, but that rule covers gas wells, centrifugal and reciprocating compressors, pneumatic controllers, and storage vessels. In relation to this permit, it covers other things, but those are the only things that we're going to talk about because those are the only things that we're covering under this general permit. And then 4I deals with compression, ignition, internal combustion engines, which essentially are your diesel engines. And that regulates emissions of hydrocarbons, NOx, CO, and particulate matter, and it also establishes monitoring, record keeping, reporting, and testing for those type of units. Oh, what can you change?
That's yours.
Oh, you're right. Sorry. Anyway, so this is beneficial in the fact that, like, by having this covered under this permit, like in past, sometimes you'd get one permit, and like if you had a generator, you'd have to go and get a general permit for a generator, emergency generator. Now it can be done here under this particular. It's just one permit that you would have to get with all the same requirements. 4J covers spark ignition internal combustion engines, and it regulates NOx, CO, and VOC, and also establishes monitoring, record keeping, reporting, and testing requirements under those rules. And then you look at the niche apps, and with this one, you got like subpart HH, which covers glycol dehydration units. And the only requirements that we included in the general permit were area source requirements, because if you're a major source of emissions, you wouldn't be eligible for this general permit. And then 4Z, which covers engines. And like I talked about earlier, if it's a new engine as it's defined under 4Z, then you have to follow the requirements of 4J. However, if it's existing, there are other requirements that are going to be based on type and size of the engine. So we have developed a list of exclusions, who's not eligible for the general permit, and this underwent a lot of scrutiny. We wanted to make sure that we were trying to cover as many facilities as we could, and so, when this list came about, like I said, a lot of people went into this and a lot of thought. So, as with all the other general permits that we've issued, there are starting criteria requirements. And so what we're saying is that we're sticking with the starting criteria requirements that we have for all the other general permits that we have, so we can be uniform, and that an emission unit cannot be located within 300 feet of any occupied dwelling, business, public building, school, church, community building, institutional building, or park. However, if you are the owner of the dwelling or the owner of the business, and an applicant comes to you and asks you to sign a signing criteria waiver, and you have and the company gets the signing criteria and it's all notarized, then that signing criteria can be waived, but only under the instances of it's the homeowner or the property owner or the business owner. If it's a community building or a church or school or institution building or park or whatever, there's no citing criteria waivers available in those circumstances. Also, if you are a major source as defined in our PSD rules or Title V rules, you're not eligible. And for those who are not aware, a major source you're looking at, like for Title V, is 100 tons per year of any of the regulated pollutants, or 10 tons per year of a hazardous air pollutant, or 25 ton a year of hazardous air pollutants combined. If you would exceed those values, then you are not eligible for the general permit. Also, if you have to, like if it's a facility that would have to submit like a RACT analysis under Rule 21, it's not eligible for the general permit. We also excluded natural gas processing plants And the reason we decided to do that, well, I mean, they were never included before in any other general permits, but the reason we decided to do that is because it is a very resource-intensive review. They're very time-consuming. Unfortunately, there have been compliance issues with most of those facilities and citizen complaints, and we just felt that it was not the best way to handle those was through a general permit. We felt it was best to handle natural gas processing plants under a Rule 13 individual review process. Natural gas sweetening plants are also excluded, but I can't remember the last time we had one of those applications come in here. Also, if you have a storage vessel that's subject to subpart KB, it's not eligible. And if you have a steam generating unit that's subject to subpart DC, it's not eligible. And we also did not include turbines in the general permit. And if you are trying to obtain a synthetic miner, like if you're going to take an artificial limitation to stay below major source status, that's not allowed under the general permit because the notice requirements that are associated with obtaining a synthetic miner cannot be accommodated under the general permit notice requirements. So one place where we kind of stayed the same because we felt that it worked well in the past was the way that the G30, 35, or 70 were structured, and the fact that like the applicant chooses the sections of the permit that they are going to be subject to, or they're seeking registration under, I should say. The general permit as it's written contains 15 sections. All facilities that will be registered under it will be subject to sections 1 through 4. So as an applicant, we're going to talk about the application this afternoon. You will see where you will be able to say these, I'm going to try to be subject to the other sections, fill out these forms. You will tell the agency when you apply, these are the other sections that I'm applying to be registered under. So the application comes in, we review it, and if we make the determination that everything meets all the rules are going to be met, and the agency decides that they're going to issue the registration to the facility, the DEQ will tell the facility what sections they're applicable to and what their throughput values and emission limits are for each piece of equipment. And you will see this afternoon how that is laid out. So sections 1 through 4 are sections that everyone will be subject to. And section 1 is going to be like the emission units. So basically section 1 will indicate the emission units and the sources that are authorized at the facility. And this follows suit with the other general permits we have. There's not a lot of the differences in this. Section 2 outlines general conditions, such as, definitions that may apply, notification requirements, administrative requirements that are associated with the general permit. Those are all covered under Section 2. And then Section 3 is facility-wide requirements, and that's where you get into the siting criteria, general limitations and standards, general stack testing language if stack testing is required, the protocol you have to follow as far as like submitting your protocol and providing notice to the agency, so if they want to have someone out there to witness the testing that they can, and reporting requirements, and then the fee requirements that are associated with this. And in Section 4 are general source-specific requirements that are going to apply to all sources. And that's going to talk about like air pollution and emission reduction device requirements that may exist, establishing the fact that it is a minor source, so it is below the 100-ton threshold, or 10 or 25 for hazardous air pollutants. Fugitive emission standards that are going to be associated with this general permit, and then general record keeping or information that needs to be kept on the air pollution control or emission reduction devices at the facility. So now we're going to talk about each section of the general permit. the first section, section 5, is the section about gas well effective facility. That section is going to contain the NSPS subpart quad O requirements for the gas well effective facilities. It establishes requirements for well completion operations and hydraulic fracturing. One thing that we really like about this general permit and that we feel is going to be beneficial for everyone is that in the past, when we would issue a general permit, it would be like at the time whenever, go through and somebody would just take the federal requirements and stick them in the general permit and it would get issued. And then 6 months from now, the federal requirements change because they're updated, and then you're stuck with a document that's kind of dated. We have decided to incorporate the standards by reference in the general permit. So if 6 months down the road after the permit's issued, that the federal requirements change, the facility is required to do what the federal requirements say at the time that the federal requirements change. So they're not stuck with a document that's dated. And that's beneficial to us. It's beneficial to the public because they're kept up to the latest standard that's out there, and it's beneficial to the facility because now they're not trying to come up with a compliance plan that's different from what their permit says, because their permit says one thing, but in reality the federal standards are something different. So by incorporating the rule by reference, we believe that it is beneficial to all parties involved. Another thing too, as far as the completion combustion devices, flares, or any type of incinerator that would be utilized because of the gas well effective facilities, those particular units would be subject to our state rule 45 CSR 6, which I touched on earlier, which would cover those units. You'd be required to meet those standards as well. And we're also requiring in the permit that if you have any type of deviation from a visible emission requirement that's listed in any of these rules, that deviation must be reported to the agency. The next section deals with storage vessels. And this is going to be the most time consuming of all the sections I'm probably going to discuss today. Probably should have did that last, but anyway, there are multiple sections that storage vessels could be subject to. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen, it says registrants that are subject to this section may also be subject to section 7 and 8, which I'll get to in a second. But as far as the storage vessels go, I mean, we're going to have requirements in there. There'll be throughput limitations associated with storage vessels, emission limitations associated, not in all instances, but in some instances, emission limitations associated with storage vessels. It outlines how emissions are to be determined for those storage vessels. It covers control devices, or it talks about like what you have to do to have control devices for storage vessels. It talks about site-specific sampling requirements and when that is required. It addresses low-pressure towers and vapor recovery units. Throughput limitation compliance will be shown on a 12-month rolling total. That's what's going to be required in this general permit. It'll be 12-month rolling total on the throughput limitation. As far as making a determination on your emissions, what we're saying is that you have to determine your potential VOC emissions. Well, I mean, this is also in the federal rules. We're not going out on a limb here, but they had to be calculated using a generally acceptable calculation methodology. And a lot of what we see is ProMax or HISIS or EMP tanks. Those are calculation models that are used in the industry to estimate their emissions for VOC from these particular storage tanks. And when that information is submitted, we need more than just what the output is. We need everything that went into it as well. And that has to take into account, when you do that, it has to take into account the maximum average daily production for a 30-day period. So you have to take the maximum average daily production for 30 days and put that data into the calculation model to determine what your potential is. you can take into account an air pollution control device or an emission reduction device in determining your potential emissions if it is permitted. So if it's in a fairly enforceable document that you have that, then you can utilize that in calculating your potential to emit when you send that application in. Also, any vapors that are recovered and routed to a process, like through a vapor recovery unit, those are not required to be included in the volatile organic compound potential to emit. So if you have an air pollution control device that is subject to subpart quad O, so like you are, you're subject to subpart quad O, then you will be subject to, not to go back. If you have an air pollution control device, then you're also subject to the requirements in section 7 and 8, which I will talk about here in a little bit. And that's going to be like, and we'll go through what a list of those are. Another thing too, like if you have flares or enclosed combustor devices or incinerators, those are subject to our State Rule 6, and those are also listed in this section and what you need to do to show compliance with State Rule 6. As far as making a determination on whether a site-specific sample is required, if you have a storage vessel that does not have an air pollution control device or a vapor recovery unit, then you have to use a site-specific sample to determine your potential to emit within 30 days of flowing back the well. So once again, if you do not have an air pollution control device or a vapor recovery unit as part of that storage vessel, then a site-specific sample is required. For those facilities that utilize low-pressure towers as part of their process, if you calculated your VOC flash emissions utilizing the low-pressure tower, you must notify the DAQ if the low-pressure tower was removed. At that time, you have to make a determination whether or not an administrative update or a modification is necessary based on if there was any type of emissions increase. However, you are still subject to the emission limitations that were set forth in that permit, unless you modify or administratively update your permit. So if you had a limit and you took a low pressure tower off, you still could not exceed the limit there was. You have to notify the DAQ though that you did remove the low pressure tower, and then make the determination at that time whether or not you need to modify your permit. Another thing this section covers is vapor recovery units. One thing here that we've done is we've established the fact that if you have a vapor recovery unit as part of your storage vessel, that it is determined that the capture and control efficiency of that vapor recovery unit is 95%. It's written in there, it's 95%. And we've had applications come in and say, well, it's 97%, it's 98%, Well, the permit says 95, so that's all that you're able to claim. But what we've done this time, is we said, okay, you can go higher than 95%. And we've provided additional requirements on top of the vapor recovery unit that if you do these additional things, then you can claim a higher efficiency. So for each additional requirement that you want to say that you're going to do, and you're going to be required to do it because if you take these additional requirements on, they will be noted in your registration that's issued. Enforcement will be aware of it, so when they come out to inspect, you better be doing these things. But for each one of those additional requirements, you can claim an additional 1% control efficiency. Meaning that if you want to try and take it on, you take on 4, you could claim a 99% control efficiency. In some instances, it's helpful that you need that extra to stay below a certain value, but the opportunity's there. it reduces emissions at the facility, it reduces emissions from the tanks. But what we're saying is if it's a VRU, it's 95%. If you want to do some extra things, you can go up to as high as 99%. You don't have to go to 99, you go to 96 or 98. You can pick what you want to do, but you can go higher than 95% with the way that this general permit's written. So it affords flexibility to the company, and also by doing that, it reduces emissions from the facility as well. So this is going to apply to all storage vessels. Well, this is going to apply to storage vessels whether or not they're Quad O or not. However, if you are a subpart Quad O storage vessel, then you would be subject to Section 7. And Section 7 contains requirements for storage vessel effective facilities under subpart Quad O. And that's going to be each storage vessel that was constructed, modified, or reconstructed after August 23rd, 2011, that has VOC emissions equal to or greater than 6 tons per year. Once again, like what we did with the incorporating by reference for the gas wells, we did the same thing with this. So if they decide that they're, instead of Group 1 and Group 2 vessels, that we're going to have Group 3 vessels, then this permit will accommodate that, and we won't have to worry about modifying a permit, and you won't have to worry about, am I going to operate under the permit? I have to operate under the rule. And you're looking at 2 different documents. It'll all be under one document. If this situation applies to you, and you have a storage vessel that's going to be after August 23rd, 2011, and it's 6 tons per year, it's going to be greater than 6 tons a year, then the VOC emissions must be reduced by 95%. The emissions determination requirements are the same as I discussed in Section 6 as far as how those emissions are to be calculated. The models, to use the calculation methodology that's common, to use the max average daily throughput over a 30-day period. All that remains the same. And then that particular section outlines control requirements and the different type of control devices that can be utilized in making those emission reduction of 95%. Now, Section 8 talks about control devices and emission reduction devices that are not subject to NSPS subpart Quad O. So if you had a storage vessel that was subject to Section 6, and it was going to utilize a control device or an air pollution control device, then this is where you'll find those requirements. These requirements will also be able to be utilized for other processes under this G80, such as tanker truck. It'll reference Section 8 as well. And for like DHI units, if a DHI unit was going to be controlled by a flare, it's going to reference Section 8. So Section 8 can apply to just more than just storage vessels. However, if it is a storage vessel subpart Quad O, those air pollution control device and emission reduction devices will be found under Section 7, which incorporates subpart Quad O by reference. So if it's a Quad O storage tank, it's Section 7. If they have an air pollution control device, if it's not a Quad O and they have an air pollution control device, it's Section 8. So, like I said, other things that may be covered would be like the tanker truck loading operations as well. This is going to cover enclosed combustion devices and flares, cover requirements, closed vent system requirements, carbon absorption systems, condensers or BTEX eliminators, and vapor recovery units. And all those requirements are outlined in this section. I want to repeat, I want to make this clear, like, again, is if you would utilize any of these things and have it in a permit, and that reduces, and you get a federally enforceable document, reduce your emissions below 6 tons per year, then you would not be subject to the control requirements in Section 7. You would be Section 6 and Section 8. And this afternoon, when we go through the forms that need to be filled out, you'll see exactly in detail what type of control systems they are and what kind of information that we are going to be requesting. And in Section 9, which was the easiest section of this whole permit to write, so that made me happy, but Section 9 dealt with gas processing units, inline heaters, heater treaters, and glycol dehydration reboilers. But you cannot be above 10 million BTU per hour of any of these units, because then you're looking at subpart DC, and we excluded subpart DC from this general permit. So all these units, historically, from what we've seen, you're looking at like 1 to 1.5 million BTU, if not smaller, units. So they're very small units. The emissions from these units are very small. So what we've said in this particular section is we've limited the maximum design heat input for these units, and there are opacity requirements or visible emission requirements for these units. Otherwise, I mean, that's pretty much all that this section covers. Section 10 deals with pneumatic controllers, and those are regulated under 4.0. And so I don't have to keep repeating myself. Essentially what we've done is anything that's NSPS, we've tried to incorporate by reference. Simply, that alleviates any future problems when rules change. But pneumatic controller, under subpart 4.0, there's two different scenarios. One at processing plants, and one between the wellhead and natural gas processing plant. But since we're excluding natural gas processing plants from the general permit, we're only going to talk about the pneumatic controllers that are going to exist between the wellhead and natural gas processing plant. And essentially, what that said, I mean, you're limited. You're not going to be able to, it has to be less than or equal to 600 cubic feet per hour. There are exclusions in the permit or in the rule that if for operational reasons or safety reasons that they have to be, that they need to be greater than that they can be. But generically speaking here, you're limited to 600 cubic feet per hour or less for these pneumatic controllers. And the pneumatic controllers do have to be tagged with the month and year that they were installed, reconstructed, or modified. And just to add a little bit of clarification here, that has to be a continuous bleed, natural gas driven pneumatic controller. So if it's air driven, it's not subject. Or if it's intermittent, if it's really intermittent and you're just not claiming it's intermittent, then it wouldn't be subject. It has to be continuous bleed, natural gas driven. Once again, another requirement out of subpart 4.0 deals with central fuel compressors, which we rarely see any of those, but there is language out there for them, so we incorporated that into this permit, which says that if you have a central fuel compressor with a wet seal fluid degassing system, it has to, the VOC emissions have to be reduced by 95%, and the methods for doing that are outlined in the rule under the control device requirements. And if you're subject to this section, you will also be subject to Section 13, which deals with internal combustion engines. However, this section does not apply to central fuel compressors that are located at a well site. It's clear in the rule that if it's at a well site, that this particular language does not apply. So it's only going to apply from after the well site. Like if you had a compressor station, then this would, and you had a centrifugal compressor, a compressor station, or a dehy station, then it's going to apply to you, but not at the well site. Reciprocating internal combustion engines and generators, or no, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead, I'm sorry. Okay. Reciprocating compressor effective facilities. Also language out of 4.0, similar to the centrifugal language in the fact that if it's located at a well site, it does not apply. One of the changes to the recent changes to subpart 4.0 also addressed reciprocating compressors. It used to be that it said that if you had a reciprocating compressor that was subject to this rule, that you had to replace the rod packing of that compressor before 26,000 hours or 36 months, whichever came first. That's what you had to do. But when 4.0 was updated there at the end of 2014, it also provided the option to collect the emissions from the rod packing in a rod packing emission collection system. And said that system had to be operated under negative pressure and route the rod packing emissions to a process of a closed vent system so that would meet the requirements of the rule. So you could still either replace the rod packing every 26,000 hours or 3 years, or install the rod packing collection system to capture those emissions and route those to a process. And once again, if you're a reciprocating compressor, you're also subject to the internal combustion engine language in section 13. Okay, so this is what everyone is used to. I mean, you usually if you're applying for a natural gas permit, you have engines. So this is like a lot of time. This is what like the meat of the permit is when it gets issued. It has in compressor engine language in it. And so we're going to address with this section are going to be establish emission limits for the engines, operational requirements of those engines. If the engines are going to utilize emission reduction devices such as catalyst, what's required of those catalysts. And it also incorporates the federal standards. Subpart 4I for diesel, subpart 4J for natural gas, and then subpart 4Z, the NESHAB. Another thing that is beneficial, in my opinion, that we've done this time that wasn't done in the past is for facilities that had like a auxiliary generator. If they were going to operate more than 500 hours, it's going to operate year round because it was going to provide power for like a building or whatever. It was never covered in any of the other general permits. So like you could get a general permit for your compressor station, but then you had to come get a Rule 13 permit for a auxiliary generator. And so now that's going to be covered here, so you don't have to do that anymore. So it can all be permitted under one situation. As far as the emergency generators go, there is language in there that's still going to limit the emergency generators to 500 hours per year. So if you're going to permit an emergency generator, you are subject to that limitation. Otherwise, the language that goes along with these engines didn't really change from previous versions or things that you're familiar with from Rule 13 permits that have been issued. Tanker truck loading. This has been this here is something that like we get questions about all the time, but it's not covered under any general permit that we have, and creates issues because this is something that happens, yet it's not covered under a general permit. So we have language in Rule 13 permits that we've issued for these types of operations, so we're going to carry it forward and put it in the general permit. If you're subject to this section, odds are you're probably going to have a control device or emission reduction device that's also going to be on one of these units. So then you're going to also be subject to Section 8, which we talked about earlier. This section is going to address emission limitations, if any, and it's going to depend upon whether there's control devices or whether or not the emissions can be quantified other than an estimation process. It'll have throughput limitations, operational requirements on how the truck loading is to be operated, any control device or VRU requirements that may be applicable to it, and what those capture efficiencies are. Anyone who has applied for a permit or filled out an application and done calculations for this, you know, calculation methodology that's utilized for this is out of AP 42. And AP 42 is clear that as far as when you're developing capture efficiency for these, that if you have a tanker truck that has not passed like NSPS or MACT level leak test for vapor return, then you're only allowed to assume that 70% of the vapor is being captured. So please do not submit your application saying that like we capture 99%, because you don't, because there's nothing that says that you do. So if you have vapor return and you have and the truck has not passed in one of these leak tests, please only assume that 70% of those vapors are being captured. If you have a control device on top of that, and you say you have a flare and it meets section 60.18, then you apply the 98% to the 70. So essentially you're capturing and controlling 69%. You're not going to, you know, so please follow those procedures, and that's all outlined in the application, which we'll talk about this afternoon. However, we get applications all the time where people say, oh, we have an NSPS, we're only going to load NSPS trucks or MAC level trucks or whatever, and so we should be able to claim more than 70%. So we've listened to what people have to say, and you know, when we have issued permits where we have allowed people to say that it's an SPS level or MAC level, and we've given them that increased control efficiency. However, there are requirements in the permit that you have to prove that every one of those trucks that you've loaded meet those requirements. So you have to get that information from whoever you're using. I mean, I know some people are dedicated and they have the same people over, and some people use, I don't want to insult anybody, but you just fly by night or whatever, and they're going to just show up. And what if they show up at 5 o'clock on a Friday to load a truck, and it's just Jim Bob down the street, and that truck's not going to meet MAC level? Well, guess what? You're out of compliance with your permit, and that's a problem for you. So I caution people not to do this, because I really believe that you're setting yourself up for a non-compliance issue. But if that's the route you choose to go, I mean, you can turn trucks away and say, well, you know, I'm not going to load unless you're that, and that's fine. And I'm not saying everyone's bad. That's not what I'm saying. But I would use caution and only utilize that in situations where you really have to, because I really believe that you're setting yourself up for failure if you do that. So if you do choose to say, I'm going to do MAC level or NSPS level controls, there is a requirement to permit that you have to have proof. You have to keep records that those trucks meet those requirements. If you don't, then feel free to talk to Robert. Okay. And then section 15 deals with glycol dehydration units. We have taken the double H requirements, incorporated those into this particular section. In this particular section, it establishes emission limits for the glycol dehydration units, throughput limitations for those units, what the operational requirements are, any type of control devices or emission reduction devices that are going to be associated with that, recirculation rate requirements, and wet gas sampling requirements. And then if you are subject to this, you could be subject to the control device requirements, but you're also going to be subject to Section 9, which is going to deal with reboilers. So like if you have a reboiler that's associated with what you will, it'll have the requirements in Section 9, which is just going to be visible emission requirements. All air pollution control devices and emission reduction devices associated with any glycol dehydration units are going to be subject to Section 8. We've also established a value, which it's kind of been silent in the past. It's kind of been like, what's the number? This is the number, and we're putting it out there that this is the number. That if you have a glycol dehydration unit that's recycling back to the flame zone of the reboiler, that you can claim a capture and control efficiency of 50% if you meet the requirements that are listed in the general permit. However, if you believe that what you have is greater than 50%, and you can provide the information to us through manufacturer specs or some type of testing that you've had done, we will entertain the value. We will entertain the fact of utilizing a value greater than that, but you have to provide the responsibility on you to provide the information to us that we believe that that's the truth. The recirculation rate of the maximum glycol cannot be exceeded. As far as gas sampling collection and analysis, that's going to be based on the frequency of that is going to be based on your HAP emission levels. You've all seen the tables in the permits before in G35 of, depending upon your emission level of HAPs, how often you have to perform the gas sample collection. And anyone who has received a Rule 13 permit from us within the last several years has seen all the quarterly parameter monitoring that we require in order to demonstrate compliance with the with those federal standards. So with that being said, that was as quick as I could be, high-level presentation on what this new general permit will involve. I want to thank, everyone that was involved in it. And like I said, this afternoon we are going to discuss the application forms and the registration document that will be associated with this. And we do have it looks like about 5 minutes to take any kind of questions. And then once noon comes, we'll have lunch. And I just want to remind everyone who is watching the live feed, we'll start back at 1, but I've been told that in order for this to happen, you have to refresh your browser. Okay. And so to be able to watch the afternoon session. So I will open up to questions. I think, not you, Dave, but the guy behind you was first, and you're second.
On your list of equipment, so there was a section for generators. Does that include microturbines as well, or is it just reciprocating generators?
The question was, will the generator section cover microturbines? And the answer is yes. Unless it's a turbine that's going to be subject to subpart 4K. If it's just like a small microturbine, which we've seen a lot of those are covered under like a microturbine generator, those will be covered under Section 13 of the generator section, yes. Dave.
I just want to get applicability clarification. Say we have a well pad that, subject to photo for completion requirements and everything, but post flowback emissions are below the 6 pounds an hour or 10 tons per year. Are we still allowed to submit a determination for that facility, prove its exemption, or is it automatically subject to the G80?
If it's you're flowing back a well and that's you don't have any other equipment associated with that.
It's a very dry well.
Right. If it's below the 6 pounds per hour, you can submit a permit determination for that, yes. I mean, unless you're utilizing, you wouldn't be able to utilize a flare to control the emission below 6 tons per year, because if you're utilizing a combustion device, like a flare and a closed combustor or incinerator, that's going to be subject to Rule 6. So it wouldn't matter what your emissions were at that time, you would need a permit. But if it was a simple flow back with no type of control device, and it was below the emission threshold, then you could submit a permit determination. Jesse?
That brings up another question to me. I was under the understanding that the flow back portion of it would be exempt from permitting. Is that true, or is that something that now would be encompassed? You know, say when the stationary source equipment's not there yet, but you still have your temporary flow back equipment there for like what Rob was talking about, the secondary stages of flow back, and you have to use the completion combustion device. That's still exempt. Is that true?
It comes down to whether or not the tanks are intended to be there for less than 180 days. If the flowback tanks are the same tanks you're going to leave there for production, then you've installed the stationary source prior to getting the permit. But if they are true temporary tanks on skids that are intended to be there less than 180 days, then you're looking at them being exempt from the permit.
Okay. So basically the same as operations as normal, or as it has been
Yeah.
handled in the past.
Yeah.
Yes.
We didn't have any intention of changing the way we handled the
Right.
tanks for this general permit.
Yes.
How are you gonna handle, pending applications for the whole general permit when DEP?
That is a good question. Okay. The question was how we were going to handle pending G30, 35, or 70 applications once the G80 permit was issued. In a perfect world, which we're not in, when the notice period ends on March 30th, we get no comments, like to issue this on April 1st. But we know that's not going to happen. So we're not going to issue any 30, 35, or 70 registrations after the 80 is issued. So we will have to work with companies when we get close to that time where there's going to be an interim. I mean, so most likely what's going to happen is you're going to get a telephone call from the person reviewing your permit, and we're going to have to work with you guys and make sure that we issue the permit, get the information that we need if we need additional information to issue the G80. So it's possible on our end, it's going to be people, like if we have the G70 application, but the G80 gets issued, that we're going to have to work with the applications that we have in order to make them G80 ready to issue the G80. But we are not going to issue a G80 permit, permit registration, even if you apply for a 70 prior to. It's going to be an 80. We're not going to issue a 70 once the 80 goes live. And we have 2 minutes left before we go off the air. So if anyone else has a question, yes.
It'll take this much time. In section 9, for the heaters, the opacity requirements, what would be method 9, method 22, same as what the G70 is now?
Right. I can't remember everything, so let me look. Essentially, what we've said is because these units are very small in nature and we have limited the size of them, that at director's discretion, that if we ask you to, you have to do a method 9, and that's the director's discretion. There's no time set forth. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. And like I said, everyone be back here by noon. And for those doing the live feed, refresh your browser at 1. Be back by 1. Thanks.